Okay, hello everyone. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. So glad you could join me. Before I continue with this reply to Sairen-Bo, I have mentioned in the past, not very often, because I don't want to get preoccupied with this kind of thing, but since I've now, we've gone through some major treatises with the opening of the eyes and so on. And now this is, I think, the second or third personal letter that is considered part of the Gosho, but there's some controversy around that. So I thought this might be a good place to address it. As I read through the remainder of this letter to Sairen-Bo, there was an unmistakable tone to this letter that it just how do I want to say it? It didn't sound like Nichiren's voice. Not entirely. Maybe it is. But with research, we come to find that there are some very long and deep questions about these personal letters that Nichiren wrote, and whether or not some studious monks with good intent were interpreting communications they had either directly with Nichiren or through communications, who then wrote their thoughts or their capture of their learning of Nichiren's document and signed them as though these were Nichiren's words, and they later became apocryphal. Apocryphal, if you're not sure what that means, is simply that something isn't authenticated. There's no way to authenticate it, or it isn't authenticated, and yet it circulates as an authentic document or writing or saying or whatever. Sorry, I hope my lip isn't too distracting here. Anyway, it's distracting me, obviously. I've in a search for scholarship on this in this day and age, it can be difficult. The internet is flooded with shall I say biased views that just want to keep the current or recently current rhetoric alive and adamantly adhere to it. That actually makes me more skeptical. There's one author and researcher who in recent years I've found to be an amazingly articulate and perspicacious researcher. She really does her homework. I'm going to read a little excerpt from her dissertation that's online from Princeton University. I think I'll put a link to it on my study site, on my own site, because as so often has been the case, I will have links bookmarked to certain key documents that I've researched, only to find out years later that the site has disappeared or the documents have disappeared, and I lament the loss of that scholarship. So I have downloaded this PDF, and I think that I will put it on my own website with a link to it so that it will remain accessible. Other than that, though, as a scholar, I don't know if any of you know this book. This is by Jacqueline Stone. And Jacqueline has, you can go on YouTube and you can see and listen to lectures that she's given at different, for different reasons, but around her scholarship of Buddhism in this time period. I'm going to read from a dissertation, which I don't think is published anywhere else. It's a school paper, and it's online, as I said, on Princeton's site. And I downloaded and I printed a little bit of it. I'm not going to read this. Well, I think it's 600 pages or something like that, so it's quite a dissertation. But with specificity to this one letter, and not so much this one letter, but Sairen-Bo. I wanted to read a little blurb that she put in here ahead of dissecting a different letter attributed to Nichiren, written to Sairen-Bo, just to illustrate a little taste of the scholarship argument around this stuff. And basically, it centers around, it's difficult to ascertain for a couple of reasons. Number one, Sairen-Bo is an actual person of the Tendai school that converted to Nichiren. We've already read that in this letter. And because of that, and we know that Nichiren greatly respected Dengyo and Tendai and Tendai's original Enlightenment thoughts, and incorporated that greatly into Nichiren's own doctrine on the Lotus Sutra and Buddhist critical thinking. And when we read these letters to Sairen-Bo, they seem to be greatly focused around that transmission of knowledge. And so you would think that makes sense, because I'm talking to an ex-Tendai priest who studied in Mount Hiei, which at the time was in decline intellectually. So for them to jump ship and find solace in Nichiren's doctrine and the expounding of Nichiren's understanding of Buddhist thought in general through the lineage of Tendai must have been very important for their communications, a common ground, if you will. So it's not unexpected that Nichiren would spend a lot of time around these concepts, basically nurturing their current understanding, those coming from Tendai, and enveloping them into Nichiren's understanding and doctrine of enlightenment. The other thing that is going on in this particular Gosho, and in several, is the master-disciple relationship. And in this letter, this is the part that made me wonder. Nichiren speaks a lot of his own position in all of this, and their Sairen-Bo's and his relationship as being something karmic, long-lasting throughout time. And as we know, birth and death in Buddhism are a statement on the cycle of impermanence, how nothing is truly extant, and everything has an entering into a manifestation and a decline or a fading away from manifestation. And this happens moment to moment. So the rhetoric to the non-initiate could be confusing, right? But there's a shift in Nichiren's thinking from early on, because Nichiren, although I've already read where he I don't want to say lauds, although I just did, but he pays great respect to one of his teachers in his travels and learning about Buddhism and his scholarship. But in point of fact, as Nichiren becomes more and more confident in his understanding and his scholarship, and puts forth what we now call the Nichiren doctrine, he realized that he didn't really have a strictly master-disciple relationship with anyone of his contemporaries. He couldn't point to a certain person and say, this is my teacher, this is my mentor, this is where I gained entry into this knowledge that I've now developed or revealed in my own life and understanding. And he ends up, in fact, in search of this master-disciple relationship. He ends up constantly referring to people like Dengyo, Miaolo, Tendai, and the lineage all the way back to Shakyamuni, and he kind of relates his mentor as being Shakyamuni. This may seem a little weird, but the end result is that what Nichiren ends up saying is in his own way, exactly the same thing that Shakyamuni was saying originally. And I think this excited Nichiren when this really solidly gained confidence in his mind, was that, wait a minute, of course Shakyamuni is my mentor. He is the mentor of all being. So there's no reason you can't follow word for word what Shakyamuni is saying and not treat him as your personal mentor, because that's his advent in the world. That's the whole game. Oh my goodness. So from this point on, Nichiren, not in this letter, but through his arc of teaching, really affiliates himself solely with his mentor Shakyamuni and exhorts all of his priests, lay followers, and so forth, students, to do the same thing. So in this way, Nichiren not only identifies himself as the votary of the Lotus Sutra and positionally, hierarchically, a very important master disciple to all of his people, that follow all of his students, but he also is self-effacing or humble in that he wants to get out of the way, in a way, by teaching everyone that he teaches that it's not about following Nichiren, that it's about following the Dharma, the original teacher, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni, right? That we're all his children. You hear this talk all the time. So this is kind of a shift. It may seem subtle, but it's deeply important, because this is the import of that Gohonzon, that the original intent, and you hear that rhetoric all the time, the original intent of Shakyamuni was that anyone and everyone, no matter what their walk of life, no matter what their life condition, could access this supreme perfect enlightenment. That it wasn't for a special caste of people or special knowledge or special scholarly knowledge. And so Nichiren embodies that thought, that original thought of the Buddha, in a document that allows anyone with eyes, ears, mouth to chant Myoho Renge Kyo, Myoho being the entire concept of this birth, death, time without time, existent, non-existent, all of the myriad concepts that make up the 3,000 realms in a single moment, the Nidana, all of it is in the two characters Myo and Ho. Myo being this unfathomable understanding that ultimately time is a fixture of understanding for the human mind, and Ho is the evidence of that, the manifestation. The two are inseparable. So you can talk all day about the illusions of the world and the illusions that we have and the attachments that we have. Yes, those are all real experiences, but all of that experience is in this time, not time, real, not real, extant, not extant kind of paradigm, if you will. It's absolutely impermanent, and yet, as I read in the Avatamsaka, interpenetrating. That's an interesting word. It's not interdependent, it's interpenetrating. These concepts constantly revolving around themselves. Every single moment, we go from existence to non-existence, birth and death. Okay? So, I will read this little blurb, as I've already promised to you, and then we'll read the remainder of the Gosho with this in mind. No discussion of Nichiren text questioned by virtue of their connection with the original Enlightenment discourse would be complete without mention of at least one letter to Sairen-Bo Nichijo. Sairen-Bo, a Tendai monk banished to Sado Island for unknown reasons, evidently became Nichiren's disciple in early 1272, during the latter's own exile there. Numerous legends and varying accounts, coupled with a lack of reliable data, make it difficult to establish even the barest outlines of this man's biography. Yet there is sufficient evidence to confirm that he did indeed exist and was Nichiren's disciple. So you see the muddy waters of historicism and how we unearth the archaeology, if you will, of actual authenticated things. The Nichiren collection contains 14 writings addressed to him, 12 in the primary texts and 2 in the subsidiary texts section of the Showa Teihon edition. Some are personal letters, while others are little more than doctrinal essays with Sairen-Bo's name appended as addressee. Most contain extremely sophisticated expositions of Buddhist thought, written either in literary Chinese or, for the most part, a very elegant Wa-kan kokubon. No one could ever have thought, as we have seen that some monks evidently did of Nichiren's Japanese writings to less educated lay followers, that they detracted from his prestige. Of these 14 writings addressed to Sairen-Bo, not one in Nichiren's holograph survives. Therein lies the problem. As an archaeologist of authenticity, you have to find all kinds of supporting documents that validate that, yes, in fact, this did exist. Their particular interest in connection with this study lies in the fact that virtually all of these works addressed to Sairen-Bo, whether letters and essays, focus on concepts related to medieval Tendai original Enlightenment thought. Traditionally, this was said to be because Sairen-Bo, having studied on Mount Hiei and familiarized himself with this discourse and was eager to know how Nichiren understood various issues that it encompassed. However, since Asai Yoren put forth his argument that Nichiren had developed his thought independently of medieval Tendai, and that works in the Nichiren collection showing evidence of medieval Tendai ideas were therefore likely to be apocryphal. Virtually every writing addressed to Sairen-Bo has fallen under suspicion. Here we will consider that one that, if genuine, represents Nichiren's earliest extant letter to Sairen-Bo, written on Sado in the second month of so on. And now she's going to go into this other letter, which I'm not reading presently. But I wanted to read you that little introduction just to give you a flavor of this may very well be Nichiren's own words. And that what she's saying essentially is the concepts herein is not that just somebody made up a letter to sway you to one kind of thinking outside of Nichiren's doctrine, but what you see here is some scholarship of that day trying to maintain their understanding of Nichiren's doctrine and being faithful to it. So, knowing that, we can rest assured that this is an important document to read, that it has good information in it, just as it led us to the Avatamsaka Sutra, certainly valuable knowledge in our study. But if we start to sense that something, this doesn't ring true, we shouldn't get too hung up about it. Just acknowledge it and go, interesting. And keep that within our database of all of the rest of the studies that we make. And that way we can glean what is important, what is relevant, and supports Nichiren's doctrine that we have throughout many very elaborate treatises, and simply just eschew the little asides that maybe they're just not very important. They're not very strong distinctions. Or even if they seem to be, in the light of all the other study that we have, we can say, well, that was something that either was a weak moment or written or mistranslated, because we have that layer of abstraction as well. The translator may be influenced to put in their own characterization of what they read as authentic or non-authentic So there's another layer, right? Their own interpretation, their own view of what they're reading. And we're dealing with, we're not just dealing with casual, bored people writing treatises. We're dealing with, the monks of those days were the scholars. They were the educated. They were the universities, if you will, of the day. So these were not just casual readers and interpreters. These were people who were very focused on getting it right. Okay? The only question here is, are we reading Nichiren's words at getting it right, or are we reading somebody's interpretation of Nichiren's words and maybe they're a little bit off? But overall, those little distinctions, we can let them fall away because the greater message is in the teaching, just as it is with all of the sutra. And Shakyamuni himself, beginning with his sermon, said, don't get hung up on these words. Don't get hung up on me. Use this to find your own path to the same thing I experience, Buddhahood. And this is what Nichiren is doing. So with that, with all that, it's becoming a cliche now, my blah, blah, blah. Let's continue. So Nichiren writes, probably. As the Buddha tells us, we should regard as correct teachers and good teachers those who honestly discard the doctrines of the four flavors and three teachings, the Hinayana and Provisional Mahayana Sutras, that were expounded as expedient means, as well as the Nembutsu, True Word, Zen, and Precept schools, and the sutras upon which they rely, and expound only Myoho Renge Kyo, the one great reason for which the Buddhas appear in the world. Well, we have enough evidence to support that statement, don't we? As for myself, I, Nichiren, having been born in Japan in the first 500 years of the latter day of the law, have encountered the three powerful enemies and met the various types of calamities and trouble just as the thus come one predicted would happen, but without any thought for my person or my life. I chant, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. I ask you to consider with the utmost care whether I deserve to be called a correct teacher or an erroneous teacher. Each of the proponents of the various schools I have mentioned above declares that he, beyond all others, has grasped the meaning and is practicing the Lotus Sutra, but none of them have been exiled to the province of Izu, as I was in the Kocho era, or exiled to the island of Sado, as I was in the Bun-En era, or been led to the place of decapitation at Tatsunakuchi, or faced the countless other difficulties that I have. If the sutra passages that predict such difficulties are true, then you should realize that I am the correct teacher, the good teacher, and that the scholars of the other schools are erroneous teachers and evil teachers. Now, this is where I thought, and that's perfectly reasonable that he would say those things to Sairen-Bo, who's just recently converted, right? It just seemed a little too self-praising, because Nichiren is usually far more humble and he shows evidence in the sutra to indicate why he's being persecuted. Obviously, it's because he's practicing correctly, and he shows scriptural and text to support that. And again, this goes back to his mentor as Shakyamuni rather than somebody local, right, to his time. It just, I don't know why it was bothering me, but you'll see as I go on. In addition to these, there are a great many other passages in the sutras and treatises that make clear the distinction between these two types of teachers, the good and the bad. But I am sure you already are familiar with them, so I'll not go into them. Again, as Jacqueline pointed out, these were educated scholars of the Tendai school. So Nichiren also was a scholar of the Tendai school, along with many others. This is part of Nichiren's scholarship and how he arrives at his own doctrine. How wondrous that in your letter you say that from now on you will reject the erroneous teachers of our time and will entirely upon me as the correct teacher. When the Thus Come One Shakyamuni, our original teacher, appeared in the world in order to expound the Lotus Sutra, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the other worlds, like shadows and echoes, came forth and assisted him in his efforts to spread the teachings. Now it seems that they have appeared here in Japan as envoys of Shakyamuni, many treasures, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions to help me in my efforts to spread the teachings. So this is exactly what I was talking about. Now, this is his mentor, and he's now going to expound on how Sairen-Bo should also see it as his personal mentor. Even though he's following Nichiren now, Nichiren is immediately diverting his attention to the original teacher, Shakyamuni. And this sounds like Nichiren. The sutra says, quote, I will send persons conjured up by magic to other lands to gather together assemblies to listen to the law. I'm sure magic is a Western invention in this rhetoric. This is not something Nichiren would say. But he would talk about conjured up by mind to other lands to gather together assemblies to listen to the law, and I will also send monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen conjured up by mind to listen to the preaching of the law. These persons conjured up by mind will listen to the law, believe and accept it, and abide by it without violation. The monks who are spoken of in this passage refer to you. Therefore, when the sutra speaks of persons who listen to the law, believe and accept it, and abide by it without violation, you need to look no further than yourself. How can there be any doubt about it? So this is a very important statement, because Nichiren is saying here that not only should you accept Nichiren or Shakyamuni as our original teacher, parent, sovereign, so on, but when you hear these discussions, emanations, like I've said before, of other Buddhas, or mind exercises of conjuring people and listeners, and predictions of sorts onto how the Buddha will spread, the teachings of Myoho Renge Kyo will spread, you need to count yourself as directly spoken to, right? Although the sutra speaks of those who, having heard the law, quote, dwelled here and there in various Buddha lands, constantly reborn in company with their teachers, there are persons like the 3 groups of voice hearers who, after receiving the seeds of Buddhahood, reject the Mahayana, select the Hinayana, and sink into the 5 paths or 6 paths for a succession of rebirths. But when the time to achieve Buddhahood arrives, they're able to obtain emancipation one after another. So this seems like it's missing a little bit, because Nichiren would not miss the verbiage that would say, when the time comes to achieve Buddhahood arrives, when they accept the full teachings of the Lotus Sutra and discard the Hinayana and provisional Mahayana. He's already described that, but he wouldn't fail to repeat it here. They are able to obtain emancipation one after the other. So that's kind of a bit of an omission there. How gratifying to think that you have now cast aside the erroneous doctrines and erroneous teachers of the Nembutsu, True Word, and other schools, and become a disciple of Nichiren. Being a disciple of mine means that you follow the same teacher I do. Not that you believe in Nichiren, but the doctrine of Nichiren, which sends you right back to the original, right? In any case, like me, you should condemn the slander of the law committed by the followers of other schools and cause them to reject the erroneous and embrace the correct. Then, when you arrive in the land of eternally tranquil light, there will be 3 kinds of Buddhas. The 3 kinds of Buddhas are seated and appear before the Buddhas, Shakyamuni, and many treasures. You will ask, quote, were Nichiren and I bound by a promise to be teacher and disciple from the beginningless past, or were we not? Was I sent as an envoy of Shakyamuni Buddha to assist him in his efforts to spread the teachings, end quote. And when the Buddhas replied, quote, just so, then you too will understand in your own mind when these things happen. Therefore, you must be, by all means, be diligent. You must be diligent. So here he's saying that when you awaken, when you practice diligently and you attain your Buddha wisdom, your Buddha mind, your Buddhahood, your Buddha understanding, your clarity, this question that's being asked is really one that Sairen-Bo and practitioners ask themselves, right? So what he's saying is, when you come to the understanding, you'll understand how these things have happened, how it is that you and I met, how it is that you've studied so diligently in the Tendai schools in order to then come to the Nichiren doctrine that redirects you to the full and complete teachings of the Lotus Sutra and Shakyamuni and all of the sutras and the scholarship of enlightenment right now in this present form. You'll then, it'll all become clear to you. And so he exhorts him at that point. Now you have to be diligent. You must be diligent. The word that I use is resolve. You must be resolute in your determination for your Buddha wisdom, your Buddha mind. As a matter of course, I began giving you instruction in the important doctrines around the second month. And as a result, on the 8th day of the 4th month after midnight, in the hour of the tiger, 3 to 5 a.m., I performed for you the ceremony of ordination in the precept of the perfect teaching of the wonderful and difficult to understand law, Myoho Renge-kyo. How could a person who has undergone this ordination fail to become a Buddha or perfect enlightenment in his present existence? There it is. This is vintage Nichiren, right? And if in this life you have attained the level of perfect enlightenment, then in your next life, how could you have any reason to regress to the stage of near perfect enlightenment and other lower stages of practice? This is a reference to earlier teachings, not the Lotus. In view of our promise from the beginningless past, I love the play with time in Buddhism, and the principle that one will be constantly reborn with one's teacher. If I, Nichiren, attain Buddhahood in my present lifetime, then how could it be possible for you to become separated from me and fall into the evil paths? This is a more obtuse reference, but Nichiren is indicating that if obviously I'm a descendant, or in my scholarship, I'm a descendant of Shakyamuni and all the lineage of scholarship that comes before me. And my teaching is that of the original teaching, that you are able to be enlightened in this very moment. Then this has been with you all along. You've just been unaware. And so once you know that, how can you be separated from it? Once you have that knowledge, you can't be ignorant again. Follow? The prophecies of the Thus Come One recorded in the scripture, when viewed in the light of the Buddha's true intentions, never contain the slightest falsehood with regard to either secular or religious matters. Now in the Lotus Sutra it is stated, quote, after I have passed into extinction, one should accept and uphold this sutra. Such a person assuredly and without doubt will attain the Buddha way, end quote. It also says, quote, this way one will quickly attain the unsurpassed Buddha way, end quote. If these passages of prophecy should be meaningless, and if the prediction that we will attain Buddhahood should be a lie, then the tongues of all the Buddhas will break apart, the tower of many treasure Buddhas will crumble and fall, and the place upon which the two Buddhas, Shakyamuni and many treasures, are seated side by side will be changed into a bed of burning iron in the hell of incessant suffering. Hyperbole. And the three lands of transition, actual reward and eternally tranquil light, will be transformed into the three evil paths of hell, hungry spirits and animals. But how could such a thing ever be possible? How assuring, how assuring. If we continue to think in this way, then, though we may be exiles, we will have cause to be joyful in both body and mind. So day and night I ponder the important doctrines, and hour by hour, moment by moment, I savor the principle that allows us to attain Buddhahood. And because I pass the time in this fashion, though months and years go by, it does not seem long at all, and the hours that have elapsed do not seem like many. It is similar to the case described in the sutra when the two Buddhas, Shakyamuni and many treasures, seated side by side in the treasure tower, nodded in approval over the wonderful principles of the Lotus Sutra, and although 50 small kalpas had elapsed, because of the supernatural powers of the Buddha, it seemed to the great crowd assembled there like no more than half a day. And this is a reference to many stories in the Lotus Sutra that seem to take the span of time out to an incomparable distance, incomprehensible distance. But in the spirit of the teaching, all of that happens in that moment. So again, time expands and compresses, and because it's a temporary thing. Among all the persons since the beginning of our present Kappa who have incurred the wrath of their parents or the rulers and have been exiled to distant islands, there can be none more overflow with joy as we do. Therefore, wherever we dwell and practice the single vehicle, that place, Myoho Renge Kyo, that place will be the capital eternally tranquil light. And without having to take a step, those who are our disciples and lay supporters can view Eagle Peak in India, and day and night will go to and from the land of eternal tranquil light that has existed for all time. What a truly inexpressible joy it is. All time. When you make a statement like all time, that's in that moment that you experience it, right? Through your mind. There's that expansion and compression of time again. So delightful is the thought that I will now make a promise to you. If you should be released quickly from exile and return to the capital, although the Lord of Kamakura may continue to refuse pardon to Nichiren, I will call upon the heavenly deities, and when I have returned to Kamakura, I will write to you in Kyoto. If I should be pardoned first and return to Kamakura, I will call upon the heavenly gods to make certain that you are able to return home to the capital. With my deep respect, Nichiren. So, this is kind of this is a letter. There's many things going on in this letter. First of all, there's excitement. There's excitement that Nichiren has a new student, a student that's committed to learning and studying with Nichiren and his doctrine. Certainly there's that. An added level of excitement is simply because this new student is somebody that Nichiren has great respect for as he signed the letter. Sairen-Bo was a Tendai priest, not just a lay believer, not just a casual adherent, but somebody who not only, and there's a hint of this at the end there, not only was a student of Tendai Buddhism, but a teacher. And this is important to Nichiren, remember, because he's trying to get the word out. And so he needs dedicated scholarship around him to help him expand his influence and convert more and more people to Myoho Renge Kyo, the ultimate teaching of Buddhism, of Shakyamuni Buddha. Especially since he himself is being exiled and persecuted. The powers that be are doing everything in their power to limit his influence. So he needs surrogates that he can rely upon that will keep pure his insights and what he's trying to spread without like diverging and going other ways, right? Ultimately that happens. We know there are many Nichiren sects today, but again, if we do as we're exhorted to, study broadly, even letters that we're not absolutely certain were written by Nichiren himself, the core of the teachings, as Jacqueline pointed out, are very sophisticated and very considered in the scholarship of Buddhism. All right. So I don't mean to scare you away from these things. I just think it's important to keep in the back of your mind that if something doesn't ring right, either it's because there's something missing from it, it's a weak translation, or it's my own weakness, and maybe I'm not quite getting this. So that's why it's important to have these discussions, the Sangha, to hammer this out. But certainly if we study broadly all of it, the essence, the truth of the teachings, the meaning of the teachings will bubble up, because it's constantly in there, churning around and repeated in many, many ways. Okay? So in that regard, I'm super thankful for you. You guys keep practicing. Comment in the sections below the video. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your participation in this. Stay strong, Myoho Renge Kyo, and stay healthy. Thanks. We'll see you soon.